The cudgel struck the flare anchor an instant before her hand did. Wood burst under the blow. Cold shot up her arm to the shoulder, sharp as a winter nail, and the black veins racing through the floor stuttered. Not stopped, only checked. The man on the boards laughed wetly around his crushed throat and reached for her ankle with numb fingers, trying to hold her in the circle as the dark spread again. Lira stamped his wrist until bone gave, then drove the cudgel down a second time. The spike split crookedly. Light did not return so much as bleed back, thin and sick, but the silence broke. Wind hissed under the door. Somewhere in the alley a dog choked off mid-scream. Above her, claws scraped once more across slate, then skidded away. The second intruder battered the shuttered window in sudden panic. Good. He had heard it too. Lira snatched the kitchen knife from where she had dropped it, crossed the room in 3 hard steps, and lifted the bar just as he threw his weight forward. He crashed half inside. She buried the blade under his jaw and shoved. Hot blood ran over her knuckles. He spasmed against the frame, boots drumming the outer wall, then sagged enough for her to wrench the knife free and kick him back into the alley. She did not watch him fall. The first man was crawling for the ruined anchor, mouth working around a prayer or a command. Lira caught a broken chair leg from the hearth and smashed his temple until he stopped moving. Then she stood there breathing through the iron stink, waiting for the thing on the roof to come through anyway. It did not. The house creaked around her. The shattered lamp guttered. Beyond the wall, the canal lane found its voice again in fragments. A distant cartwheel, someone shouting from an upper window, the slap of hurried feet on wet stone. The city still lived. In the first life, this district would not wake for another hour, and when it did, the fires would already be set. Now the lane was stirring too early, like a body roused during surgery. Change thread, she thought, and hated how neatly the words fit. She forced herself to move, gray wrist cloth into her pocket, black spike fragments wrapped in a rag. The dead man at the window had a brass token stamped with a gatehouse sigil 3 years out of issue. Wrong in exactly the way the hound had been wrong. Future rot carried backward, hidden under familiar skin. Her hands wanted to shake. She made them search anyway, checked the alley through a crack in the shutter, then scrubbed her bloody palm on the dead man's coat before touching the latch. Across the lane, old Mara was hauling open her bakery vents, hair tied up in the same red scarf Lira had seen burned to her skull in another year. A boy ran past with eels in a bucket, cursing at the spill. Ordinary life. Ordinary voices. The sight hit harder than the fight. For one ruinous heartbeat, she saw all the dead layered over the living, the baker choking on smoke, the boy face down in floodwater, Bran hanging from a watch hook because he had spoken at the wrong time. Grief rose mean and useless. She swallowed it until it tasted like blood. Discipline returned by habit, not mercy. Bran would be headed for the East Sluice if fear had not scrambled him. The hound had shown soldiers in ash-gray coats and a witness before sunrise. If the creature still lived, it mattered more now than ever. If it died on the way, everything she had broken tonight might twist into something worse. Lira stripped the least torn cloak from the corpse, turned it inside out to hide the blood, and slipped into the alley before neighbors found courage. The lane felt subtly misaligned, as if the stones remembered another weight than the one pressing on them now. At the far end, where the canal fog thickened around the lamps, a figure in a watch cloak paused beside the runoff grate and bent to examine the slime-dark water. Even from a distance, she knew the set of those shoulders. Not possible. Not yet. Lira went still for half a breath, then started toward the East Sluice anyway, one hand on the hidden knife, because if the city had begun answering her changes this quickly, standing still was just another way to die. The watch-cloaked figure never turned. He kept crouched by the runoff grate with one gloved hand on the iron bars, as if counting the pull of the current beneath the street. Lira knew that posture. Inspectors from the lower gatehouses used it when they suspected a clog in the chain run. In her first life, this lane had answered to Gate 9, old men with swollen joints and bribe-fat fingers. This man wore his belt too high, boots too clean, cloak hem weighted with lead beads to keep it from catching in machinery drafts. Reassigned. Early. Another thread pulled wrong. She did not approach him head-on. The lane forked around a cooper's shed and a public cistern whose pump handle groaned day and night. She took the narrow branch, cut behind stacked rain barrels, and dropped into the service walk that ran between the back walls and the canal retaining stones. Here the city showed its bones. Chain housings rattled below the paving, moving sluice gates upstream by linked counterweights. Overflow pipes sweated black moisture. Every few breaths the great tension wheels under the district gave off a deep iron complaint that shivered through mortar and teeth. She had learned those sounds in hunger and flight, mapping survival by what the city moved and when. First bell had not yet rung, but the East Sluice district was waking in its own order. Tanner's boys carried lime in sealed crocks. Neitzel carts creaked toward the lower ramps because upper wards did not permit their stink after dawn. Two women in dyers' aprons argued over queue marks at a water kiosk, while a chain lift clanked overhead, hauling bundled hides toward a bridge market that would not open for another hour. Nobody looked long at Lira. Blood hidden, stride steady, eyes down. She belonged to the class of people the city preferred not to see. At the mouth of Needle Court she stopped. Memory pressed hard enough to blur her vision. In the first life, a fishmonger's awning had sagged here, making a blind corner where she had once waited out a patrol. Now the awning was gone, the support post freshly sawn, and the open space gave a clear line of sight all the way to the tannery lane. Future echo flashed cold across her thoughts. Turn left, rooftop crossbow, 3 breaths. She obeyed at once, slipping under a dripping stare just as a bolt snapped through the space where her throat had been. It buried itself in the pump post and quivered there. No shout followed, professional. She counted 2 breaths, then 3, listening. Nothing from the roof except pigeons and the rain tick from broken gutters. The echo had saved her. She moved faster, cutting through a bone-renderer's yard and stepping over strings of fat hanging pale in the dark. Her pulse settled into the old marching rhythm. Cause and effect. Someone watched the direct approach to the tannery before first bell. That meant Bran had been expected, or the hound had. A second echo came when she reached the lime sheds. A hard certainty that the crawlspace door would be barred from outside, that Bran would have panicked and fled into the drainage culvert beneath the east wheel. Lira followed it, circling the shed, boots slipping in wet ash. The culvert mouth yawned open and empty except for a wash of tannin foam and the stink of old rot. No Bran, no hound. Behind her, wood clicked softly. She turned with the knife already in hand. The crawlspace hatch under the third lime shed stood open by a finger's width. Someone inside had just eased the latch back into place. The false echo left a bitter taste behind her teeth. Altered thread. Unstable. She went low, crossed the yard between hanging hides that brushed her shoulders like cold hands, and laid 2 fingers against the damp boards. From within came Bran's ragged whisper, trying and failing to quiet an animal that was beginning to growl. Then another sound answered it from farther under the tannery floor, the measured scrape of boots where no one else should have been. Lira kept her hand on the hatch and listened past Bran's breath. The scrape beneath the tannery floor came again, slow and careful, someone counting beams by touch in the dark. Not a gray man. Their kind hurried when they thought fear was on their side. This tread was disciplined, economical, and horribly familiar. She lifted the latch and slipped inside, lowering the hatch without a sound. Bran flinched back in the cramped dark, one arm around the hound's neck. The creature's silver-tipped fur stood rigid. Lira pressed 2 fingers to her lips. Beneath the floor planks the hidden passage ran between old support piers and runoff channels, a forgotten service throat built when the East Sluice had still fed barges through this quarter. The tannery had rotted around it, but the city's bones remained. Water dripped somewhere ahead. Then a shuttered glow edged around a beam, and a man crouched into view with a hooded lantern held low and a short blade reversed along his wrist. The old wound under Lira's ribs seemed to open again. Captain Ashran Vale looked younger by nearly 10 years, unscarred except for the white seam at his chin, his ash-dark hair still cropped to regulation, though no regiment wore gray in this district yet. In her first life he had died on the north wall with half his command and her brother's blood on his gloves, cursing her for being too late. Now his eyes passed over her with no trace of recognition, only a soldier's instant accounting. "Woman armed, cornered, dangerous. Move from the hatch," he said quietly. "If they open it, you die first." Trust him to begin with the useful truth. Lira shifted aside at once. His gaze flicked to Bran, then to the hound, and sharpened. "That thing drew them. It's also the reason they're here before dawn," she said. His knife rose a fraction. "You know who they are. Enough to keep you alive if you stop wasting seconds." The insult should have bought steel in her throat. Instead, he studied her another heartbeat, measuring the steadiness of her voice against the absurdity of the claim. Above them, boots thudded across the tannery floor. Someone overturned a rack of drying hides. The hound rumbled deep in its chest, and one of the men overhead went still at once. Ashran extinguished the lantern with his thumb. Darkness closed tight. "3 above," he murmured, proving he had counted the footfalls too. "1 by the yard gate. 2 more on the roof line," Lira said. "Crossbow on the west eave." A pause. "How?" She could have said, "Because you died learning how they pen prey in alleys." Because she had watched his last battle 100 nights in memory. Because the future was leaking into the present through a wounded animal and a changed thread. Instead, she felt along the beam until her fingers found the old runoff lever. She remembered from a flood season long before the world ended. "When they breach the hatch," she said, "take the boy and go north through the sluice throat. Don't argue." "And you?" Lira set her weight on the rusted lever. Above, the hatch bar rattled. "I'm giving them the wrong quarry." She heaved. Ancient chains groaned through the walls. Somewhere under the tannery, a sluice gate slammed open, and black chemical runoff surged into the service passage with a force that buckled planks and punched upward through the hatch in a stinging wave. Men shouted overhead. In the chaos, Lira drove her shoulder into Ashran, not to knock him down but to send him and Bran toward the northern crawl while she lunged the other way, knife in hand, chasing the sudden screams as if she belonged to them. The runoff hit her calves like a kicked gate and turned the passage floor to poison-slick glass. Lira slammed one hand against sweating stone, caught herself, and kept moving while men above the hatch coughed and cursed through the tannery stench. The underwork swallowed sound strangely. Every shout came back bent. Every footstep answered from the wrong direction. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed beneath a row of ancient chain housings bolted into the ceiling, their links thick as wrists and furred with soot. When the sluice ran hard, the chains trembled. She felt it through her boots first, a constant iron shiver, as if the city were grinding its teeth around her. She forced herself deeper, away from Bran's route, counting intersections by memory and touch. Left at the cracked cistern pillar, down where the masons had patched old brick with newer concrete after the canal riots. The changes were wrong. In her first life, this branch had been sealed for another year, condemned after a partial collapse. Now the warning boards had been removed, and fresh scrape marks showed silver through the grime where something heavy had been dragged through recently. Not by scavengers either. The tracks ran straight, disciplined, wheel rim true, and the soot around them had been disturbed too carefully. Someone had used the dead artery because they knew nobody honest would come here. Behind her, boots entered the tunnel, not the chaotic rush of frightened hired muscle, measured, spaced, hunting pace. Lira slipped into the belly of an old winch chamber where 3 chain lines descended through stone collars and vanished into black water below. The room smelled of rust, cold ash, and the faint bitter tang of lamp oil. A maintenance table stood against the wall, one leg braced with brick. On it lay a folded survey sheet weighted by an iron pin, dry despite the damp all around. Her pulse gave one hard thud. Men creeping through underworks did not leave paperwork by accident. She opened it with stained fingers. It was a city flow map, but not one sold to guild factors or canal wardens. Red grease marks ringed 3 pressure points along the East District mains, converging beneath Lantern Square, where the first fire had begun in her other life after the gasworks' failure. Beside the marks, a neat coded hand had added timings for bell changes, watch rotations, and evacuation choke points. At the margin sat a wax seal impressed with a broken wheel inside a ring of thorns. Not an official crest, a private one. Under it, in plain script crueler than any cipher, were the words, "Ensure civilian panic precedes breach report. Witness suppression authorized." Her throat tightened until swallowing hurt. She had smelled that fire again for years in sleep, had remembered mothers throwing buckets at flames fed from below while magistrates lied above them. Accident, they had called it. Faulty mains. Old city, old pipes, regrettable losses. But the map told the truth in grease and wax. The district had been arranged like kindling, and someone in this earlier, untouched year was already setting hands to the stack. A tremor ran through the chamber. Dust sifted from the chain collars. One of the hanging links clicked, then another, passing a vibration down the line. Not collapse, activation. Lira crouched at once and pressed her palm to the floor. The beat came regular as a heart with outside help, machinery taking load somewhere ahead where no machinery should have been running at this hour. Then voices drifted through the adjacent conduit. The hound escaped the anchor. Then the square proceeds without it, another man said, calm, educated, impatient. The first event must hold. If panic shifts districts, recalculate the corpse count and close the spill gates earlier. Lira folded the map once, twice, and slid it inside her coat. Stone grated in the dark beyond the chamber as a hidden door or chain-driven lift began to open, and a colder draft touched her scarred cheek. She rose with the knife low in her hand and moved toward the sound before whoever preserved disasters could disappear back into the city's bones. The hidden door split the wall ahead with a groan of old teeth, and a slab of stone rolled half aside to reveal a narrow lift cage rising on chains slick with black grease. Lantern Square's underworks breathed through it. Heat, iron, gas, and the copper stink of blood. Lira flattened herself beside the opening as bootsteps descended within the cage. 2 men rode it down, one holding a shuttered lamp, the other a hooked pole meant for handling something that bit. Their voices were still calm. That steadiness chilled her more than panic would have. She moved when the first man stepped clear. The knife punched up beneath his jaw before his lamp could open. She caught his weight, lowered him without a clang, and drove her shoulder into the second man's ribs. He crashed into the cage wall hard enough to rattle the chains. The hooked pole swung in a savage arc and tore cloth from her upper arm instead of breaking her throat. Pain flashed hot. She answered with the stolen cudgel, smashing his wrist once, twice, until bone gave and the pole dropped. He did not cry out. Gray cloth bound his forearm. Wrong year, same silence. Then the cage jerked upward, not by itself. Someone above had seen the chains shudder and thrown the mechanism into reverse. The dead man slid from her grip. The living one bared his teeth and lunged not for her, but for a lever set into the wall beside the shaft. Lira caught what he meant a breath too late. He slammed it down with his unbroken hand. The conduit beneath her feet answered with a deep hydraulic thud. Somewhere ahead, iron spill gates were moving. She drove the knife into his spine and left it there, already running. The floor sloped toward a service gallery ribbed with pipes thick as torsos, every seam sweating vapor. Through the grating underfoot she heard water shifting below. Not in the lazy canal pulse she remembered, but in a forced redirection. A city's veins squeezed by hidden fingers. If the spill gates closed early, pressure would build under the East District mains. Not enough to ignite yet. Enough to crack old joints, flood alleys, trap crowds where the fire would later find them. A bell struck faintly overhead. Shift change. On the map, that had been one of the marked timings. She reached the first wheel and threw her weight against it. It did not move. The mechanism had been pinned with a locking bar, fresh set and greased. Practical sabotage. No prophecy needed. She jammed the broken hook from the pole through the spokes for leverage and hauled until scar tissue in her shoulder screamed. Metal shrieked back. The wheel turned a handspan. Pressure slammed the line. A flange burst somewhere down the gallery with a blast of steam that skinned her knuckles and filled the passage with white. In that blind, hissing cloud, an echo struck her. Lantern Square washed not in flame but in boiling fog. People stumbling half-scalded into alleys where ash-gray coats waited with covered lanterns and clubs. Different dead, different lie. Lira coughed, tore the locking bar free, and forced the wheel another quarter turn before the pipe beneath it split outright. Water and steam hit like a charging beast. She was hurled against the wall, breath crushed from her chest, but the pressure in the line changed. She heard it in the machinery. One gate halted, another stuttered, the planned rhythm broken into ugly improvisation. Not stopped, only spoiled. She dragged herself up by a ladder bolted into the stone and climbed toward the nearest maintenance hatch with the map plastered wet against her ribs. Below, alarm whistles began to answer one another through the dark. Above, the city was already shifting under the damage she had done, and somewhere in those new fractures men were adjusting their count of the dead. Lira shoved at the hatch until night air split through, then pulled herself into it before the next correction could close around her. She rolled from the hatch onto a tarred rooftop slick with mist and burst pipe runoff, then lay still long enough to hear the city rearranging itself below. Whistles cut through the dark in crossed patterns, no longer the clean ladder of a routine alarm but a broken call and answer, as wardens found flooded culverts where dry lanes should have been. Steam pushed up from grates in dirty white breaths. 2 streets over, a team was already cranking a counterweight winch to raise a bridge plank before the swell took it, iron teeth clacking against the ratchet. She had not stopped the trap. She had kicked one support loose and made every other part strain under the weight. Lira got to her knees and looked east. Lantern Square glowed through the haze, dimmer than it should have been. Good. The pressure shift had stolen fuel from the main gas line there, or delayed the charge, or both. But along the canal road, shuttered lamps were moving in pairs with the careful spacing of trained men. Not guards. Too disciplined. They were already adapting, sweeping people away from one kill box and herding them toward another. The gray men had planned for resistance, only not her particular shape of it. That bought minutes. Minutes bled fast. She tore the soaked map from inside her coat. The ink had run at the edges, but one mark remained legible. A grain warehouse near the east sluice, circled twice in the same hard hand, she remembered making years later while counting bodies. In her first life it had burned after dawn with laborers trapped in the loft. This time Bran was hiding a wounded future beast under Terran's lime shed not 5 lanes away. Cause and effect tightened like wire. If the sweep reached the tannery while the warehouse panic began, he would bolt. Bran had never known how to stay put when terror started wearing other people's faces. She moved low along the roofline, favoring the shoulder the steam blast had half deadened. At the edge she dropped to a balcony, then to a rain barrel, then to the alley stones. Water ran around her boots warm from the burst mains. It carried soot, lamp oil, a child's wooden bead. Ahead, a cart had jackknifed where the paving dipped. One wheel vanished in a hole where undermined brick had collapsed into the drain channel. A woman screamed for help from beneath the axle. Two men tugged uselessly at the mule while the street level kept rising. The district was becoming what the city always pretended it was not, a machine that chose whom to crush when its timing changed. Lira jammed her shoulder under the cart rail and heaved with the nearer man before he could object. The axle lifted enough for the trapped woman to drag free, sobbing and slick with black water. "Take the upper steps," Lira snapped. "Not the square. The lower grates are backing." They obeyed because she sounded like someone who had seen the next minute and disliked it. Maybe she had. Maybe she only remembered too many versions of drowning. Either way, she left them climbing and cut toward the sluice through an alley roofed in laundry lines and steam. Halfway there, someone stepped from a service arch with a hooded lantern and a short recurved blade. Ash-gray coat, gray wrist cloth. Not one of the dock thugs from Brand's rooms. This one stood balanced, patient, as if the wet stones belonged to him. His lantern hood opened a finger's width. The light inside was not flame, but that same starving dark she had seen in the flare anchor, caged and fed. "You should be dead in the cellar house," he said quietly. Lira did not answer. Her knife came up. The man's gaze dropped to the old scar across her forearm, then rose to her face with a stillness that chilled her more than the weapon. Recognition should have been impossible. She had never stood before him in this year, in this body, in this unwrecked city. But he smiled like a man hearing a familiar footstep behind a locked door. "No," he murmured, and for the first time the voice inside the echo was not her own memory. "You're earlier than before." From the tannery quarter, the hound let out one sharp, ragged cry, and every shuttered lantern along the canal road turned at once toward the sound. The alley seemed to narrow around that cry. Not louder than a dog's bark should have been. Not to anyone who did not know what had lived behind Brand's eyes these past months. What impossible shape had shivered under old sacks and damp straw while he lied to it in a voice meant for frightened children. But the sound hit Lira like a nail driven through memory. In one life it had come from a battlefield trench. In another, from a dissecting room beneath the academy after they had cut too deep and learned the creature could mimic pain it had never felt. Here now it came from a lime shed with rotten hinges and a boy who mistook mercy for secrecy. The gray man heard the truth in it too. She saw the instant it entered him. Not surprise exactly, but confirmation. His smile thinned into purpose. "So that's where you hid it." He moved first, lantern swinging low, and the alley's wet stones answered him. The cage dark inside the hood spilled in a curved ribbon instead of light, a seam of absence that erased the sheen from brick and wood where it passed. Lira jerked back. The line kissed the laundry post beside her, and the wood gave a soft sigh before collapsing into charless dust. Not heat, hunger. She slashed for his wrist. He caught her forearm with his free hand, and for an instant their bodies locked close enough for her to smell rain on wool, iron oil, and beneath it the bitter medicinal tang from the cellar house blast. He had been there. He had survived it. His eyes held hers with the calm of someone reading from a page already written. "You still lead with anger," he said, almost conversationally, and twisted. Pain burst up her deadened shoulder in white sparks. She let the knife go instead of the arm, stepped inside the turn, and drove her forehead into his nose. Bone crunched. The lantern dipped. Darkness licked across the wall and ate a row of hanging shirts clean out of the air, pegs spinning down into black water. He staggered one pace. That was all she needed. Lira snatched the fallen knife with her left hand and cut the lantern strap. The hooded cage hit the stones between them. For a heartbeat it remained intact, trembling like a throat-swallowing speech. Then the latch sprang. Dark poured out. Not shadow. Shadow belonged to light. This was the thing that unmade the argument. It spread flat and quick, and wherever it touched, the world forgot how to hold together. Mortar slewed from brick. The rain barrel behind her caved inward with a splintering gasp. The gray man flung himself back beneath the service arch, one sleeve vanishing to the elbow as if bitten off. He did not cry out. The discipline in him was monstrous. Lira ran. The alley behind her came apart in a rushing cough of stone and timber, opening to the night as she vaulted a fallen gate and slammed shoulder first through the tannery yard door. The familiar stink of lime and hides hit her hard enough to dizzy. Bran was there, exactly where dread had fixed him in her mind. In the shed doorway, one hand on the jamb, the other red to the wrist. He looked 17 and 5 and ancient all at once. "What did you do?" he shouted, but not at her. Because behind him, the shed was no longer dark. Something inside had unfolded at the cry. Not fully, not yet, but enough that its back brushed the rafters, and the old boards bulged outward with each wet, careful breath. Eyes opened in the gaps between planks, too many, all at different heights, all reflecting not lamplight but the black spill racing down the alley toward them. Bran turned, saw those eyes as if for the first time, and went utterly still. From beyond, the yard walls came boots in disciplined rhythm, converging from 3 lanes at once. Then the thing in the shed spoke in a voice borrowed from someone Lira had buried twice. "Don't let him see me," it said, just as the gate latch lifted from the outside.